Muy buenos días a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos en esta mañana.
A very good morning. Thanks for being here this morning. I'd like to invite everyone to take their seats, please, because we will be beginning in a few moments.
Es un placer darles la bienvenida a este diálogo.
It's a pleasure to welcome you to this high-level dialogue, this high-level talk organised by the UN Development Programme, the UNDP, and the CEAPI. Today, we have a common purpose, and it's a very ambitious one. We want to identify and develop opportunities, investment opportunities that strengthen more human development in our region and more resilient development in Latin America and the Caribbean through a discussion that seeks to promote economic growth, to drive public-private collaboration that's very important, and to consolidate strategic alliances that mobilize capital for high-impact initiatives that have a high impact in the social and environmental realms. We'll look at how sustainable investment can become a driving force for more strong democracies, for more inclusive economies and societies that are better prepared for global challenges, contributing to enabling the region to fully harness its potential of innovation, talent, in its resources and its natural wealth. Therefore, I'd like to invite you to participate in this exchange that will be very interesting so that we can identify new ways to achieve a more prosperous and resilient future for our region and for when it comes to the relationships between Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean. To open this morning's event, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Michelle Muschett, ASG of the United Nations and Regional Director of UNDP for Latin America and the Caribbean, who will be opening this important dialogue. Please go ahead, Madam. Thank you very much, and a very good morning, everyone, excellencies, authorities from Europe, Spain, Latin America and the Caribbean. Here with us this morning, leaders of international organizations and the Iberoamerican private sector, all protocol observed. As Regional Director of the UNDP for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a real honour to welcome all of you to this dialogue between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean on the side of the UN General Assembly in an absolutely crucial moment for international relations, development and cooperation. Today we're going to focus on the role of the private sector in the building of democracies and achieving more resilient development in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is an event that I am really honoured to be organising alongside my dear Núria and the CEAPI team. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you to open this space for dialogue. That is a space that belongs to you, it's your space. And the recommendations and conclusions that come out of it are yours too, when it comes to the alliances that we have. I think that this event speaks for itself, and just like was said previously, several states in the region expressed an interest in heads of state coming to this morning's meeting, but you can imagine how difficult that is to organise on the side of the UN General Assembly, because there are different rules for different rooms, and of course this morning there are several different events that require the participation of heads of state and government, like the breakfast with the US, ECOSOC and everything else. But it's a great opportunity for all of us to be here at this assembly, which, like I said, will be an historic one. Here we are. We're all here because I think we all share the ideals and the convictions whereby Latin America and the Caribbean has unique opportunities for investment in sustainability. It's the most biodiverse region of the planet, with abundant resources of clean energy, of critical minerals for the energy and green transitions. Furthermore, it is the first developing region, the most democratic developing region in the world, because we are a region that's always aspired to achieving development through democratic mechanisms. And of course today this is one of the values that unites Latin America and the Caribbean with Europe, with Spain. And I think that nevertheless we need to consolidate this and find unique solutions to overcome some of the security challenges we face and make it a more peaceful region. And it certainly is more peaceful when we compare to other regions in the world. There's also many other things that connect Latin America and Europe with deep-running historic links, shared values such as the respect for human rights and staunch support for multilateralism. That's something that has more clout than ever since the creation of the United Nations, and also a firm conviction and support for international law and democracy, like I already mentioned. Nevertheless, and beyond these unique opportunities that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean, today our democracies and our development face huge pressure that is particularly intense right now, because when it comes to actors in different sectors, including the private sector, we will be debating policies this morning, and around these we have a lot of uncertainty in the world. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we have around 50% more uncertainty than we have in the rest of the world, an accelerated increase in political polarization and rapid social transformations and technological transformations that we're seeing. All of these things are coming together in our region with disproportionate vulnerability to the recurring crises that are becoming ever more frequent, intense, and that strengthen each other. And there are also structural challenges in the area of development that have been persistent, like high levels of inequality, low levels of productivity, and low economic growth, creating a context that lays bare the vulnerability of our development trajectory. And this development trajectory is something that can be summarized in 4 different pillars. There's been a lot of progress in development and the consolidation of democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, this progress has been profoundly unequal. Today we know that we have stagnation, and we see this in our performance in the Human Development Index as one of the indicators that we can bring to the table and look at. However, we also know today that we are extremely vulnerable to setbacks, because a third of the population lives in situations of vulnerability where they risk falling into poverty whenever a crisis emerges, and half of the population lacks sufficient mechanisms to be able to face shocks and overcome these without having long-term effects on people's lives. And the region is home to a quarter of the natural disasters that the world faces. We're a region that is investing less than 2% of our GDP in building resilience, when in contrast we see that 3.5% of GDP is invested in security measures to tackle the progress being made by organised crime. So we're seeing a distribution of resources that is not necessarily aligned with the development agenda that we aspire to. So we're going to look at solutions and hope to move forward with a new chapter of development for our region. In the most recent Regional Human Development Report that was launched last week from Trinidad and Tobago, from the Caribbean, and in Quito for Spanish-speaking countries, that also benefits from the support from Spanish foreign policy. That's been the case for the last 15 years. We thank you for that. This report is something that I'd like to mention at the beginning of this session, because this is a report that has a lot of traction because the context requires it. It is a report that doesn't only propose placing resilience at the heart of the development agenda, but rather it suggests a change of paradigm. And a change of paradigm can be made has something that has been mentioned in these reports for the last 30 years, and I think there's a lot of potential to achieve this change in paradigm for development. And this change in paradigm is something that is focusing on resilient human development, which is an evolution of the concept of human development that has already been addressed in previous reports of the UNDP. And at the end of the day, this resilient human development is what will enable people, individuals, households to live life that they value in terms of agency and capacities, and also avoiding and mitigating and even avoiding the impact of adverse events. And we know that these will happen in the time of crisis that we're living through. It's something we can't necessarily avoid, but we can work on how to prepare for them, to mitigate them, to confront them. And when these events happen, people and communities, and following conversations with actors in the markets in our region, will be able to continue to make progress. The region was disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and this is just an example. The capacity for us to recover from the effects of the pandemic were a lot slower than in many other regions on the planet, and following our human development trajectory, we were the most affected when we compared to others. So in light of this reality, in the light of crises and glowing challenges that will impact the region, the building of resilience, as set forward in the report, is something that's not just good to have. It's not just a good thing that we can achieve as we grow. Really what it needs to be is a deliberate effort at the very heart of our development agenda. And we always clarify that when we talk about resilience, we're not talking about resistance or being able to just put up with things. What we're talking about is our ability to prepare for the unknown, to respond to the unknown, and to be able to continue to prosper, even, and above all actually, in situations of adversity. And this report does not just come with this robust and rigorous and well-supported concept note, but it's also supported and backed up with various different tools that can support its implementation by public actors, but also by private actors, based on the understanding that building resilience is not something that is only the responsibility and that falls on the governments of the region, because the private sector can also play an extremely important role in this endeavour. One of these tools is the Regional Facility for Financing Resilient Human Development. Secretary Tulo will recall this. This was launched and worked on in Brazil just before the Financing for Development conference in Seville, and was presented at that conference, and we had the participation of several stakeholders who are here in this room this morning. And it is a multi-stakeholder platform that is positioning resilience as an opportunity for investment in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also an opportunity for collaboration, new alliances, and scaling up this investment and ensuring that it achieves impact. Of course, the private sector is a fundamental part of this morning's event. It's clear that if private capital is aligned with national development priorities, as established by governments, but also by international agreements, such as the NDCs, for example, on the environment, in line with the Paris Agreement, or aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda, we can see that the participation of the private sector can help us to de-risk. I still don't have a great translation for that in Spanish, but anyway, it can help us to build resilient infrastructure because we're aware of the importance of entrenching this resilience, for example, when it comes to overcoming the effects of climate change, and also providing financial services and value chains that place sustainability at the heart of their actions. Investment in resilience also is a good investment for the private sector because it creates conditions for more stable markets. It makes them more predictable and also enables them to be expanded further. Households that are able to resist shocks will have much higher demand for goods and services and better access to credit. They'll use that access to credit, and the value chains then work throughout the region. So how do we boost this agenda together? Well, this event is the beginning of a dialogue that must continue and that must land with decisions and concrete proposals for collaboration. The first thing to be clear on is that we're talking about multi-dimensional development, and this is something that needs to be built. Of course, there are different things that the private sector can do based on the sector, their goals following the different criteria, infrastructure, health systems, financial systems, and many other sectors. And before you have a document that the team prepared for this event, and there's a QR code on the back of it that if you go on that will give you a presentation and looks at a preliminary mapping of the pipeline of projects in the region that help to build resilience and that provide investment opportunities for the private sector. With different criteria, the strategic alliance, the potential for implementation, and readiness for public-private blended finance. And this preliminary mapping of the projects that you now have access to follows different criteria. And what we can see is the projects that the Global Gateway of the EU is currently implementing in the region. It's not exhaustive because there are some that have that particularly focus on building resilience, and also UNDP regional and country level projects, in particular some financed by the government of Sweden, that shows how strategic investment with a focus on resilience can give rise to a broad range of projects with a huge amount of impact on the region, but that also can attract the participation of development banks and international cooperation, South-South cooperation also, and also the participation of the private sector and other international bodies in their structure. Here we have Andreas from the OECD, and many countries from the region are also opting for supporting their projects and engaging in reforms in policy and the different schemes in countries that are enabling resilience to be inserted as a central part of these endeavours. And of course, we have all of the work on public digital infrastructure with Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean being a hub. We've been working with our partners in the region, like CAS, and we are hoping to make this a key part of the global gateway of the EU. We also have the Green Ecuador programme that is in line with the European Green Pact, and they're working with the European Union to achieve this, to create the conditions for public-private investment. And these are some of the things that you can find out about on this leaflet. The UNDP's role is also to serve as a platform that boosts cooperation, that encourages cooperation for the region. In many cases we're involved, and then in other cases we can provide contacts, opportunities for investment to take place at the right time. And just like I was saying before, today this is more than just an event, it's an invitation for us to work together to explore investment opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also with a new strategic agenda for cooperation between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean, based on the shared values that I just referred to. As UNDP, we are already putting 60 years of trajectory of experience on the table, supporting countries in the region and in the world in advancing with their national development priorities with a universal presence in 171 countries in our region. In our region, we're covering 42 different countries and territories through 26 different country offices. And this is something that we're putting on the table humbly, because honestly, this is something that's at the service of the countries in the region and you as development partners also to help to accelerate this agenda. We positioned ourselves as a platform for cooperation, creating the pipelines for these projects, the conditions for pre-investment, and also the market conditions, making the conditions conducive for these types of investments. And of course, beyond blended finance for public and private investment. We can see it as a philosophy for the region, where we're linking this regional ownership with global solidarity, where we link this immediate response that we can provide with long-term impact objectives, and where we're looking at reforming vulnerability and uncertainty and turning it into resilience for our democracies and our growing economies. We think that this is the only way to overcome common challenges in an ever interconnected and independent world. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing this conversation and following up on the agreements and the next steps that we might hopefully meet this morning. Thank you very much.
Estas palabras.
Thank you very much for those words that tell us of the challenges and the imminent crises in our region, but also of the great opportunities that we have before us through the partnerships and alliances with other countries, with Europe, with Spain, to make us a more resilient and sustainable and more human region. And so to continue, I have the pleasure of inviting Núria Vilanova, President of the Business Council Alliance for Iberoamérica, CEAPI, who will share a vision on how the private sector can become a driver, an essential driver of investment in resilient human development, while strengthening democracy and inclusive growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. Núria, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I must begin by thanking Michelle for the incredible work that she's been doing and the trust that we have in CEAPI and being able to collaborate on different projects and work together. Many of these people have made their vocation their work rather than the other way around. And I think that CEAPI has a very active role that businesses should and do play. And we have also with us Eva Granados, the Spanish Secretary for International Cooperation. We have also José Manuel Salazar on working from CEPA on all of his studies, all of their studies that help us think about things. And of course, we have Pelayo Castro from the European External Action Service. So this is a wonderful opportunity that we have to have this conversation. So, Michelle, I think if I didn't have any more time, I would say it's just enough to have some of the most significant business people from Latin America and Europe here in the room. That is the clearest message. Because we live in a world where part of the Alliance for Latin America is Iberoamerica. It has to include Spain, Portugal, and Andorra in this process, in this quest for solutions. I think there has been a radical change since the war in Ukraine. And this has led to Germany and other countries of the EU to the realization that the answer is not in the East. This has been made clear as what Germany has suffered in relation to energy. And similarly, President Trump's strategy of America first and defending exclusively the interests of the United States against those of other countries has also woken everyone up and allowed us to hear Spain's voice also, that Latin America is also our natural home. And finally, we can hear this also in the EU. Spain can really be a partner for the European Union, for it to grow and rise up with more power. And I think Pilar will have a few words to say about this as well. its interest in the region is growing, and just in a few days in Santa Marta, they will be holding the CELAC conference. And just under a year ago, there was another meeting of theirs held in Brussels, and prior to that, it was 8 years since the last meeting. So I think the Global Gateway has really brought a lot of attention in Europe and bringing the two regions together, and this is an opportunity. We've also seen new stakeholders coming onto the scene, and CEAPI has been very active in connecting with these new stakeholders. A lot of growing interest from other parts of the world also in our region. So what's happening? I think we are seeing an awakening, not just in Europe, but all over the world, in what I would call these the tectonic plates of the world are moving, but not geographical ones, but rather the interests of the world that are bringing us closer rather than separating us. And I think when it comes to unity, I think security is a watchword. Security has been associated with defense for a long time, but now we realize that security also means energy. It also means raw materials. Security also means water. And it means access to food. And I think in this realization, we have this idea that security is much broader than just matters of defense. And the business world plays a crucial role in this. Why does it play such an important role? Well, I think the ideas and the strategies are really interesting. There has been a decision from the EU on strategic minerals, but the implementation of the strategy, unfortunately, is not enough. We have recently been sitting with presidents of heads of state, and they're asking us not to allow so much space for the Chinese. But if there are no American companies that are making offers and the only offer is coming from China, well, what are we supposed to do? When there are tenders and there are no businesses out there, well, what are we supposed to do? So companies, corporates live in the real world, and we are taking action, and we can see that the law of the free market that we grew up with, where we studied the graphs of supply and demand in the first year economics, these laws are suddenly no longer so certain when rare earths are bought up and these mines are bought up by a country has no intention of selling this to other countries and simply wants to take control of production and supply. So there are strategic minerals and materials that are the property of a country and doesn't want to give them away. The law of the market doesn't work. It's not a question of pricing, it's a question of ownership. And here, as I was saying, the corporate world has a very important role to play in these strategies. They are the ones that can take decisions regarding investment that are going to be absolutely critical for investor countries. And this is not something that governments are doing. So businesses represent strategic assets for ensuring the formality of the economy. This has been a challenge. This is something we want to really put on the table. When jobs don't exist on paper, it's extremely difficult to support companies. So this is really what we need to do to bring people into the formal economy so that we can protect them and support them. So we've had meetings with presidents, but we also had a meeting with the First Lady of Guatemala, who is now taking up the presidency of ALMA, of the Association of First Ladies, or former, I'm not sure what the masculine equivalent of that is, but they're part of that association as well. And what they are doing is looking at the processes whereby social impact is achieved in their countries and building programs for the most underprivileged, the persons with disabilities, the elderly, children who don't have a family support network. And I think it's extremely important what many partners of CEAPI are doing. They're not only looking at investment, but also real benefits for their country. In an ideal world, this wouldn't be necessary, but unfortunately, these days we still need to look at supporting society beyond dignified employment and conditions and growth. I think that we are at a critical juncture for opportunities. All of these seismic shifts, the movement of tectonic plates that I was talking about, I think this means that Latin America has everything, and we should be categorized as secure with water, raw materials, food, still relatively young population, aging nonetheless, but still relatively young. And I think this makes our region the place to be. But as I was saying, we are very much in contact with the countries of the Middle East. In addition to relations with governments, we need support from other companies. We need joint investment with families of companies and business networks. We need the investors to also be owners of small and medium-sized local businesses. And this means that there needs to be one-to-one relationships, real relationships between people, because more than 90% of the business community in our region are locally run businesses. And this is why it's so important to us to work with Muschett and the UNDP to continue building resilience and to create an environment where people don't throw in the towel, people don't give up, and people stop caring about democracy because they're really interested in ensuring the basic income so that they can survive. People should not think that democracy is unimportant, and the work of the business and corporate world in this is extremely important. We have Gabriel amongst us for I think we should include multi-Iberoamerican words, this term as an official term. Multi-Latina companies. These are companies that invest in other parts of the region. I think this is a sign of how the region is changing and being reshaped. We have growing investment from Latin America in Spain, and these companies that actually grow with 1 foot on each continent, as it were. This is really bridging the divide across the oceans. And we're seeing companies that have a foot in each continent, and these, the ones, have much more opportunities for growth and will continue to bring this growth to the regions as a whole. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to work together. Thank you also to all of our partners from CEAPI and all of the businesses that are making these words a reality. Thank you.
Estimada Núria, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Núria, for highlighting these facts about the strength of our business world that allow us to create new opportunities as well. We now have the privilege of hearing our panel who are going to help us think about opportunities for public financing in cooperation with an agenda that is going to strengthen sustainable and resilient investment portfolios to ensure also that these address national and local priorities as well as the regional and global ambitions. And so I will now invite our moderator, Fernandez. Thank you in advance to all of our panelists for being here with us today. Thank you so much, Claudia. Colleagues, friends, excellencies, we are going to hear from a range of very distinguished panelists who are going to tell us about their institutional and national experience and share their thinking about how we can align financing and cooperation and bring this into harmony with resilient development as well. I would ask our panelists to limit themselves to 5 minutes because we have limited time, and Gina will help you keep track of the time and let you know when you're running out of time. Our first speaker is Eva Granado, Secretary of State for International Cooperation of Spain. She has long-standing experience in social dialogue and politics. And our recently published report that you have before you provided with the Spanish Corporation as well allowed us to consider development in the region and move to make it a more resilient trajectory. As Michel also mentioned, there's also a financing facility for resilient human development. This is something that we will have to build together as a society. It cannot come only from the public sector. Spanish cooperation and the new guiding plan in its 6th edition helps to guide this action and promotes the participation of the private sector in generating these kinds of economic and social opportunities. So from that point of view, what are these strategic alliances for bi-regional cooperation that would involve the private sector around matters such as resilience? And what leadership role can Spanish cooperation play in order to build a portfolio for investment in Latin America and the Caribbean that is going to strengthen resilience as a key pillar of human development? Secretary, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Almudena. Good morning. I'm really delighted to have been invited to this event. Thank you, Michel. Thank you, Núria. We've just been handed the report. I think this is our roadmap. This is our lodestar. And I think what we're doing is building the alliances that are necessary that the UNDP has set out for us in its roadmap. This provides a great deal of analysis, and it shows us the materials that we have to work with. I want to thank the institutions, the countries who are present here and who've contributed to this. I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to set out an overall panorama, and then I'll zoom in on a few things from FFD4 in Seville, and touch on some things that we do in Spanish cooperation. The new law on Spanish cooperation from the Kingdom of Spain, from the Spanish government, is a law more than a state policy. Is shared across the aisles by all political parties. We have a representative here of one of our autonomous communities. But really, I think the whole of society and all of our institutions are behind this, and I wanted to highlight just how important it was in that regard. Economy and democracy, that's the subheading, but we really do need to place the emphasis on democracy and how the economy must also contribute to shoring up the quality of a democracy, which for me is the root of development that is respectful of human rights. And when we talk about complex junctures and crossroads that we are living through. It also highlights the potential that Latin America has and has had. It's a middle-income region. There's been massive improvements in recent decades where women now have a much greater role in public life. This is also something we support with our feminist foreign policy in Spain. And also, ECLAC's report also highlights this lost decade. So there are some things that still need to be improved. So the diagnosis here tells us where we need to work. I also want to highlight this bi-regional relationship that exists between Latin America and the European Union. It's very important that we have Laioa here, Team Europe. We have this commitment from member states and from the EU. There are three factors that, for me, are extremely important when it comes to addressing sustainable development and linking together economy and productive development and businesses in the economy. And firstly, it's the importance of institutions. Addressing development requires robust institutions that are profoundly, intrinsically democratic and that work very closely with society to whom they are accountable. And this, I think, involves society more broadly, politicians and representatives that have the mandate to represent them, but also businesses, companies have a role in this democracy, in these institutions. The next factor is people. ECLAC has highlighted this as well. I think it's in the report, even though I haven't had time to read it yet. But human capital and training, skilling, upskilling. We need to have skilled people, a skilled workforce, and it's all about the training of human capital. In our partner countries, capacity building and technical cooperation is extremely important. And the third factor that I think is especially important is a culture of legal action. We need a formal economy, as Núria was highlighting. We need a tax base, a strong tax base, in order to develop a democratically productive system that is really focused on development and the broader general interest. So institutions, human capital, and the formal economy and the culture of the legal and formal economy, those really are the key things where we need to go deeper in our partnership. And we should work not on temporary projects, I think long-term projects that are focused on common interests are extremely important. And this comes out of the work of the UNDP and its partnerships with the business world. I'm just going to wrap up. So the two issues that I wanted to highlight. There will be a before and after Seville in this conversation. Seville really channeled and highlighted the fact that the crisis of underfinancing. We need to mobilize more and better resources to all corners of the world. The diagnosis from Seville was something that we all shared. It didn't only do that, but it proposed solutions and responses one after the other. And the next question is a multidimensional vision of development, especially in middle-income countries. This also comes close to what we're doing in Spain, in the EU, and in other institutions when it comes to working with our partner countries, when we work with businesses and countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We must go beyond income. We must examine also fragility, vulnerability, and inequalities, and we need to consider this as part of our public-private alliance in Latin America. Another point that came out of Seville is impact investment and how significant that can be, and how to mobilize an environment, generating those conditions in countries, in the territories, so that there is more and better private investment, impact investment. And this comes back to what we were saying earlier. This depends on legal security, the quality of the institutions, the strength of the institutions, and the regulatory frameworks, risk mitigation, the use of local currency. There is a whole series, a step-by-step approach that is outlined in the outcome document of Seville that we can follow, and also integrated financing investment frameworks are also very important. The countries that we work with find this extremely important. We can see these impact investments. This is why we work closely with the UNDP and the regional coordinators of the United Nations through our bilateral and multilateral projects to generate opportunities with private companies. In Seville, there was also an international business forum where we had participation from the private sector. We reaffirmed the commitment to mobilize private financing. This forum is now over. But I was speaking about these public-private partnerships, and you can also depend on Spain to be very vigilant in the implementation of the Seville agreements to ensure that they really are implemented. And finally, I do want to wave a flag a little bit for what we're doing in Spanish cooperation and highlight that in Latin America, a number of countries have plans for development in human rights. And we're working very closely on environmental sustainability and human rights. We have real examples. This is not just theoretical theories and ideas. We're working with Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and I think we have representatives of agencies that we're working with, the agencies of our partner countries in this same vein. So we have a roadmap. The desire and the will to build these partnerships and alliances is very clear, and I think Seville is a watershed moment. So you can depend on us. You can look to us. Spain believes very strongly that sustainable development requires partnerships. This involves companies and the private sector, and this is a necessary lever for us to use. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Secretaria de Estado.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Well, one thing is the leadership of Spain in financing for development, what we saw and agreed on in Seville, and the agreements that are going to continue to be moved forward. And thank you also for the work that we're engaging in with the UNDP. So you mentioned three fundamental aspects for this resilient human development, which are institutions, human development, and the culture of life. So we're going to move to the next panelist, Castro Suaregui, who's a Spanish diplomat with a huge amount of experience, has a huge amount of experience representing the European Union. So the question is, how can the Global Gateway bring together public and private alliances to move forward with policies in the region? For example, how can it achieve more development in more investment in resilient human development? Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good morning, Michel, Núria. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. And I can certainly say that I align with everything that Eva said, and I think she said it all, so I can leave it there, really. It's very early in the morning as well, but here I am with you. And like Michel and Núria said, and like Eva said as well, when it comes to alliances, Núria and I'm not sure if people listen to us so much in the region, but in Brussels they certainly do. So we're very delighted to be engaging in all of this work. And I'd like to say that during a week like this in New York, where the focus is on the different crises and problems from Haiti to Sudan to Ukraine to Gaza, that's where the focus is. And it's very difficult to create a space for things like this, like short-term bills and actions for the alliances and associations that Eva was mentioning, and I think it's going to become increasingly difficult, and that's why it's extremely valuable for us on days like this to organise events like this one. The European Union had a ministerial meeting with 70, is having one with 70 different countries this week, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, and for the European Union, it's important for us to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. In a world in which it looks on the surface anyway like there's a negative agenda generated by migration, crime and tariffs, the proposal that we're bringing to the region is one of more trade, more investment, more cooperation, and trying to address the huge global challenges together. This really is the framework that we're working in. And that's why here it's so important for us. Global Gateway, as you know, is a complex strategy. It's a change of paradigm where we're all learning to do things differently. And this is something that can't be achieved overnight. But I think as public servants, when we ask ourselves how we can work better with the private sector, because it is obvious that in the private sector there are finance and investment gaps in Latin America and the Caribbean, 3 to 4% of GDP that aren't going to make the cut, fill the gap. But these alliances, I think, are a good. Then
hace tan difícil es pensar.
They're not an end into themselves, and so what we've got to think about is how do I explain to the European taxpayer that we'll be investing their money in these guarantees for financing or opening a credit line for SMEs in Latin America? Where is the added value? Because we need to do this with public investment. The private sector can't do it on its own, given the economic and political risk. They're not able. They're sometimes able to measure this risk better than the public sector. So that's why I'd like to explain that this is the huge challenge of the global gateway. That's the challenge we face. It's quite difficult, and also there's the strategic value of the investments. And as you know, at the last summit we had a portfolio of 130 projects, and I can tell you today that 80 of these 130 projects are on track. It doesn't mean that they have necessarily been delivered yet, but they are making progress. They're complex operations. However, what's very difficult for us and what we're looking at is what is the added value of public presence, and that's what we're talking about. So on the one hand, I would talk about invisible infrastructure, which is another way of explaining what Eva was explaining. I don't think that it makes sense to say, look, this is a water sanitation plant, it's a hydrogen plant, or... No, we need to go beyond that. It's not just the what, it's the how. And here is where I think that the answer that we need to find gateway is when it comes to the alliances that we have with the private sector, that they don't only open up the way for growth and innovation in GDP, but they also increase invisible infrastructure. And here I'm talking about governance and democracy in the broad sense of the term. We're also talking about standards, public policy making. We mean legal certainty, the independence of the judiciary, and this is something that's harder to achieve. It's actually much harder to achieve, and it's slower also. Often we make investments and we then move on to policy dialogues with the partners, and we need to explain to our taxpayers why public money is being invested, and tell them what impact it has so that we can justify it. And these endeavours are not only economic, they're not only in terms of finance, because it's important to work on integration. That's important in the world that we live in. There's the Cable initiative, and it might seem a bit quixotic, but in the European Union, we have our steel and aluminium community that were really the bedrock of our projects, and now we have energy. We're promoting a regional electricity network in the Latin American region. We're having different private sector actors on board to give added value for integration, and this is something that can justify the European Union being involved in these sectors. And to just wrap up my thoughts, sometimes we talk about these matters, we call it soft investment, or I like to talk about invisible investment, but honestly, they're really quite hard, if you like. So Núria mentioned security and safety, and I think, well, an important part of my work anyway is the safety of citizens from organised crime. That's important to the EU. Without security, there can't be any global gateway, and there can be no private sector investment. The private sector won't want to invest then. But we're discussing governance, public policies, and this is hard, because I think without this, we won't be able to continue to get the private sector on board and get them to come and make productive investments that will have an impact on society and the economy, which is the impact that we want, a good impact. So José Manuel, Andreas, OECD, I think are looking at this closely, and this is something that I'm interested in too, which is the tax GDP ratio. If, in terms of public policy, we don't manage to ensure that our Latin American brothers that live in such unequal economies and societies aren't able to invest in autonomous resources to boost their public policies and their capacity to act, I think that everything that we're doing here will be important, but these are the structural questions, and I don't think it's impossible to think about how through these investments, the dialogues we're having, we can have an impact on these matters too. And the OECD, I think, plays an important role here. I think they have a lot of leverage in these processes to achieve this. And at the end of the day, I think that with Global Gateway, the European project, what we're doing with Spain, hand in hand with the region, with our partners, with you, Michel, it's not so much about the what. It's not so much about hydrogen, cable, satellite, what we're going to do, but really the important thing is the how. How are we going to do it, and what is it going to generate? So I think we need to go further, we need to be faster, and I think, for example, just to give you one example, I think we can look at how together we can design better terms of reference for public procurement, through which we can engage in publicly financed actions. I think that's the big challenge, because we are at a time where we're hearing prize only all the time. So I think we need to change a bit and look at how, with our alliances, we can improve these matters. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, director, por compartir.
Thank you very much, Director, for sharing your experiences and for articulating this fundamental link between public and private and investment, and how governance governance as a requirement for investment, and how investment is also a mechanism for improving governance and democracy. So thank you for that. We'll move on to our next panelist, Andreas Schall, Director of Global Relations and Cooperation of the OECD, where he leads the cooperation strategy with more than 100 countries and coordinates the contributions of the organization to...
En América Latina y el Caribe, cada vez más países están tratando de entrar a formar parte de la OCDE, un proceso que requiere estar en consonancia con las normas internacionales en ámbitos como la gobernanza, la competencia, la lucha contra la corrupción y la transparencia. ¿Qué impacto tienen estos procesos a la hora de atraer inversiones y participación del sector privado y cómo se podrían aprovechar para promover la creación de resiliencia a través de instituciones, instrumentos normativos e infraestructuras? Tiene usted la palabra, señor Schall.
Moderator.
Gracias, señora moderadora. Para comenzar, quisiera disculparme por no utilizar la lengua de García Márquez, sino el idioma de Shakespeare, y además, por si fuera poco, con acento alemán, pero sepan ustedes que mi corazón late con América Latina. Quisiera dar las gracias a Michelle y a Núria por organizar este evento. Muchísimas gracias por su colaboración, a ustedes, al PNUD, a Pelayo de la Unión Europea, a José Manuel Salazar de la CEPAL. Es realmente un gran placer aunar fuerzas con ustedes y es lo que muchos de ustedes han dicho. Y esto también me lleva también a la Secretaria de Estado Granados por la exitosa cuarta conferencia de financiación para el desarrollo y por el proceso que echamos a andar juntos. Cuenten ustedes con que la OCDE seguirá siendo un asociado en todos estos procesos y que también seguiremos siendo un asociado de los países que se encuentran en torno a esta mesa, porque la OCDE está moviendo a América Latina, pero América Latina también se está moviendo hacia la OCDE. México entró en el 96, después Chile, 2010, Costa Rica en 2021. Estamos ahora en activos procesos de adhesión con Brasil, Argentina, Perú y más recientemente echamos a andar un programa de país con Paraguay, con la República Dominicana, con Panamá, que ha expresado su ambición también de entrar a formar parte y convertirse en miembro de la OCDE a la larga. Lo mismo para Uruguay. En fin, hay muchas cosas en marcha y precisamente por eso acepté venir a esta reunión, porque precisamente este es un tema que nos ocupa, apoyar instituciones sólidas a fin de generar más desarrollo económico, más posibilidades de crecimiento y, como decía usted, Michelle, que más personas se involucren en estos procesos. Desde hace ya una década, porque cumplimos ahora el 10º aniversario de nuestro programa regional para América Latina y el Caribe, el año entrante, y este para nosotros es un instrumento clave a la hora de promover normas principales en 4 pilares: gobernanza, productividad, inclusión social y medio ambiente y clima. Y así en 2018 celebramos nuestra primera reunión ministerial en Lima y ahí desarrollamos un plan de acción para la gobernanza. Y esto ha servido ya para promover varios exámenes de políticas en la región. 10 sobre integridad política, inclusive uno en la República Dominicana que está en curso, 9 sobre adquisiciones públicas, 2 sobre gobiernos abiertos, gobernanza corporativa de los estados y también un examen interpares. Y debatir con nuestros miembros y asociados es un mensaje fundamental. Y esto nos lleva a cambios normativos en algunos de los países. Por ejemplo, la labor que llevamos a cabo en México con la Autoridad de Salud de México, que reformó su marco de adquisiciones sobre la base de una recomendación formulada por la OCDE. Y gracias a ello se ahorraron 3.000 millones de dólares en un lapso de 3 años. Y esto hizo que se pudieran destinar otros recursos a inversiones. Esta también es la filosofía de la Conferencia de Sevilla, encontrar recursos para destinarlos a otras partes de las infraestructuras. En noviembre, los días 11 y 12 tendrá lugar una ministerial sobre gobernanza en Paraguay. Están todos y todas ustedes invitados, invitadas. Haremos balance sobre el plan de acción. Emprenderemos una nueva alianza con los países que están sentados en torno a esta mesa. Y antes de terminar, quisiera referirme brevemente a la correlación que hay entre las instituciones sólidas, la labor que estamos haciendo en términos de gobernanza y las inversiones, porque vemos que aquellos países que tienen una trayectoria rigurosa de fortaleza de las instituciones económicas reducen los riesgos, atraen capitales privados. Por ejemplo, en Uruguay llevamos a cabo una política de inversiones en 2020, lo cual demuestra que ese país es uno de los países más abiertos en el índice de restrictividad regulatoria de la OCDE, y no solo entre las economías emergentes, sino entre todos los países de la OCDE. Y esto de nuevo les muestra el vínculo que hay entre las instituciones sólidas y la apertura a las inversiones. En estos momentos estamos trabajando en un examen análogo con Guatemala y ahora lo estamos abordando con Panamá y con la República Dominicana para llevar a cabo un programa similar. O sea que acercarse a la OCDE quiere decir trabajar juntos con miras a lograr un ecosistema más sólido, resiliente de instituciones, marcos normativos y cadena de valores, y también mejorar la conectividad regional. Y es esto algo que también a la larga contribuirá a la resiliencia de la economía, a una ventaja competitiva, a atraer inversores y a crear sistemas de gobernanza. O sea que, en resumen, vengan a la OCDE, aunque sigamos hablándoles en inglés. Pero serán ustedes y seremos nosotros un asociado muy valioso para todos ustedes, y de nuevo doy las gracias a nuestros asociados de la CEPAL, el PNUD, de España, todos los países que se encuentran en esta sala, y espero reunirme con los ministros y ministras presentes. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, director Schall.
Estas experiencias.
Thank you very much for sharing these experiences and these good global and regional practices with us. Now we're going to move on to José Manuel Salazar Shirinachas, who is the Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Executive Secretary, and the recent report on FDI in Latin America and the Caribbean. It shows that in 2024 there was an 7.1% increase compared to 2023. However, this growth was achieved with transnational corporations that were already operating in the region, reflecting a low level of interest in new companies moving to the region. So what can the region do? How can it improve its strategy to attract FDI with productive development policies? And what type of investments will contribute to closing gaps and achieving more just transitions? Thank you very much. Says the Executive Secretary. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. Congratulations. This is a very important conversation we're having this morning. Before I answer the question, because I will answer it, I just wanted to share a few thoughts on the importance of the Summit of Dialogue and the change of paradigm. I think it's very important for us to understand how and why this is so important. This will highlight how important it is, and then I'll make a brief comment on some of the needs of Latin America in order to attract foreign direct investment as a way to boost productivity, and also I'll go into some specific details in response to your question. I think that this summit from Santa Marta and also the cooperation between Europe and Latin America is very important, but now we're at a turning point, and I think it's more important than ever, given the great changes we're seeing in geopolitics and geoeconomics. The economy is changing. China was 6% of GDP in 2000, and now it's 18% today. So we're seeing an emerging Asia. They've doubled their share of the GDP. The United States and Europe have actually decreased in terms of their share. Europe went from 21 to 15, the US from 22 to 15%. They're still 15% of the global economy. And this is natural, I'd say. The rise of growth in China and India, the IMF thinks that soon India will replace Japan as the third largest economy in the world by the end of the decade. And so it's not just these quantitative specific changes, but also the way global powers react to these changes. And then we get back into what's very relevant for our conversation today, which is that we're seeing rivalry. This is classic. We often see this. There's a lot of books written about this, and the modern world, the fact is, sees a lot of rivalry in terms of industrial policies, technology, etc. And that's the reality, and that's the change of paradigm that we're seeing. and it's happened in a very short amount of time, in just 25 years. That's where those figures are from the last 25 years. So we've moved from the Washington Consensus, where the goal of globalization was free trade. We embraced interdependence. We celebrated that. We thought it was fantastic, and multinational corporations were going to make everything cheaper, etc., more or less. Of course, the full version is more complex than that, but anyway, that's the history and that's the narrative. And now we're at a time in which people are suspicious of interdependence, where it's seen as a source of vulnerability and even a threat to national security. So that's a huge change. Nevertheless, the world continues to be interdependent, and the electric revolution, the energy transition require lithium, strategic minerals, and we're all concerned about biodiversity. And so the point here, where I'm getting at, is that it's become microeconomic. We're talking about sectors, and this is the goal of the global gateway. The EU has been very visionary in putting this on the table, because we need to make it work. That's the fact. We must make it work. The fact is that in our new world, the discussions with China, the United States, and the EU are important, and the EU has put this on the table as an important issue, but it's not a coincidence, because in the Summit of the Americas, one of the most important things that's going to happen in Punta Cana at the end of the year is not just political discussions. Of course, it's going to be a lot to discuss, but there's also going to be a corporate forum. So, corporate dialogue between Europe and Latin America. I don't have time to give you more figures here, or too many anyway, because trade and investment between Spain and Latin America is very dense. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of different sectors. The next point that I wanted to briefly touch on is about why this is important for Latin America. Well, one of the diagnostics, if you like, I'll just give you a pitch very quickly, is that there are 3 development traps in the region, and the one is low capacity to grow. The data speak for themselves. I'm not going to dwell on them too much, but in the decade from 2014 to 2023, the average growth in Latin America, this is an average that, of course, is skewed by Brazil, that's 60% of GDP, but the growth was 20%. And then we had a lost decade with less than 2% of growth compared to the growth we'd sustained since the 80s. And we are heading now towards another lost decade. So it's making it very difficult to reduce poverty. We have managed to decrease it by 50%, but we have been at the same time working on creating quality jobs, and we're seeing, though, the lowest growth in jobs in a long time. Of course, we're going beyond GDP too, but the issue of GDP is a big problem. So here, the strong political message that we're sending to countries in Latin America is that they're not all stuck in a trap, but we need to double down on our efforts to improve the situation, because there's a list of driving factors that can help to boost growth with strategic minerals, sustainable tourism, etc., cutting-edge manufacturing, medical devices, etc., modern service sectors, which are an explosive sector with a huge amount of growth, with huge jobs potential. My country, Costa Rica, our main export is services, and then medical, the medical sector. So we're not exporting many goods. So the fundamental thing is this change of paradigm, this focus not only on rules, but rather negotiations, areas of influence. There are a lot of opportunities for development and growth in countries. And the important thing is to make sure this actually works. I totally agree about what you said about invisible infrastructure, institutionality, governance spaces, but we need to reinvent things to make sure this dialogue does work. And that... Right, anyway, back to your question. So, in the most recent report that I recommend you read, we have some news that's not necessarily bad. What's happening, well, in 2024 has seen a renewal of useful investment from multinational companies. There's the new types of investment, green investment, but the fact is that the multinational companies that are already present in the region are back to investing. That shows confidence, but of course a lot more needs to be done. So we have a chapter of recommendations. There's a lot to be improved when it comes to the agencies that attract investments. So we need to engage in dialogue like this one, but also private-private dialogue and geopolitics. Dialogue, diplomacy, tech diplomacy, trade diplomacy, etc. Whether you like the private sector or not, well, you need to work with them in a way that is win-win. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, secretaria.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. Thank you for putting this conversation in context, a political one, and also talking about productive development and growth and political dialogue within all of this. We're going to move now to our next panelist, Vice Minister of Panama, Carlos Guevara. In 2026, we'll be commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Congress of Panama, where they laid the foundations of multilateralism in the American continent and Panama's vocation as a strategic hub and a bridge for regional cooperation. At a time such as ours, when the future of the world is being redefined and multilateralism is being redefined, how can the historical vocation of Panama be put at the service of countries to align private sector investments with the development agenda in a context of growing uncertainty? Vice Minister, you have the floor. Yes, I'm not a very technological fellow. I'm more of an ideas man, but I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for this wonderful question that Almudena has posed that allows Panamanians especially, but all of our Latin American brothers and sisters, and also those in other parts of the world, to think about multilateralism and how we can square that with the idea of promoting the good things that we want for our peoples. And first of all, I would like to recall the reason for the convening. Simón Bolívar in 1915 said that the natural capital of America should be Panama because of its geographic situation, and he highlighted his desire for there to be a major congress here, bringing together the three major parts of the world at that time. It seems that Africa wasn't really on the map, as it were, back then, but there were three parts: Europe, Asia, and America. And Panama is the critical meeting point of these regions, but Panama is the meeting point for all parts of the world where people could talk and discuss the high interests of peace and war. This is how it was introduced by Simón Bolívar. And years later, following the independence of a number of territories, in 1954, the Peruvian minister convened this Congress, and the recently independent states and Republican states came together. And there, I think, is something here quite significant that I want to highlight initially, and is as follows. They met in order to create new institutions, Republican institutions that are based on the idea of people's sovereignty. And this now doesn't really mean anything. Every country is called a republic, but at that time, when the political regimes in the vast majority had been monarchies, this was a truly radical and revolutionary idea at that time. And I think this, to bring this into the modern day, we need institutions that are in harmony with the needs, with the aspirations, with the desires and expectations of the people in order to really make progress. We can talk about the details of what these institutions should look like, but we need a multilateral international system that is based on the sovereign equality of states and the notion of collective defense or cooperation in order to bring about this collective security. And a very important principle that was included, enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and others, which is the peaceful settlement of disputes. War is not a legitimate way of settling disputes, and we need to arrive at peaceful solutions, peaceful settlements, and that is what we laid down at that time. And so the question now is, how does this serve us today, in this day and age? That was the question. It's a very pertinent question. The 200th, the bicentenary of this Congress is being celebrated next year, and this is extremely important, this commemoration, and it is going to allow us to put Panama at the center so that we can really serve these values. It seems that these values are fundamentally under assault in this day and age. Everyone here, everyone sitting around this table, I don't need to go into this, but I think everyone here understands that multilateralism is under assault. We heard from Mr. Salazar just a moment ago about the trap of economies. This idea that might is right is suddenly now on the table in many corners of the world. And the idea that international cooperation really doesn't have any real value, that international relations should actually give up on multilateralism and go back to bilateral negotiations. All of these ideas are out there and they're growing in strength. And all of these ideologies have an impact on the business environment. This is unquestionable. Everything has an influence, an impact on how business happens. And this is why the government of Panama wants to make Panama's history and our values available to other nations of the world who are interested in promoting these original founding values that are extremely valid and can be very, very useful for us when we move to sustainable and resilient development, which is the subject of our meeting today. More specifically, perhaps, we hope 2026 will be a year of commemorations and celebrations and international meetings in Panama. The OEA is going to hold its Council of Ministers, the Association of States of the Caribbean, temporary presidency at the moment. President Molino has expressed his interest in convening heads of state and government to come to Panama to discuss these high interests as defined by Simón Bolívar. And these are fundamentally sustainable development. This is a priority for our countries. This has already been made clear. I know that I'm running out of time, but there are a couple more things that I'd really like to touch on very, very briefly. The first of these connected to this whole idea of a propitious environment for promoting development and to attract investment that can then be used to build resilient development. Someone mentioned the dictionary of the Spanish Royal Academy, and I think we talked about predictability, whether this exists in Spanish, the predictabilidad. Predictability has been transliterated. This is extremely important in Latin America, and this is a challenge that we have. We need to ensure that our environment is predictable, our institutions are reliable, predictable, that they function, that they apply to everyone, that they are universal, they are solid, and everyone is subject to these predictable institutions and parameters. But not only that, but they also need to be efficient, because if they are not efficient, they don't achieve their aims and they don't resolve the challenges for which they were created. So this bicentenary is extremely important. This initial Congress wanted to create new institutions for the new American republics that emerged following independence. And these new institutions wanted to be predictable. We need institutions that are predictable, reliable, that set out frameworks and parameters for action where everyone can operate within these frameworks, and to do so in a predictable and reliable way so that we can incentivize business action in order to achieve the goals that we aspire to. Without this predictability, in order to shore up these institutions, it cannot work. And these institutions must be democratic internally, and also within the international framework, it must be based on multilateralism. We believe that 2026, the coming year that we're preparing for already, can be a huge opportunity to promote and spotlight these values and to ensure that they really become a reality for the future of our peoples. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister, for this historic and strategic vision for multilateralism, for this call for predictable institutions to attract also private investment. We're going to continue with our next panelist, Mr. Hugo Ribena, Vice Minister for International Cooperation of the Dominican Republic. Vice Minister, resilience is not a new concept, especially for countries of the Caribbean. This is a reality that defines societies, communities that experience pressures. So given this, how can countries in the region integrate economic policies and build resilience sustainably through international cooperation, and what cooperation mechanisms and innovative financial mechanisms can we use to achieve this? Thank you very much. I'd first like to thank Michelle and Núria for holding this space for us. I'd also like to thank the UNDP and the CEAPI and other organizations that have always supported our region. I would like to talk about the Dominican Republic a little bit. This is one of the key economies. We have a growth 3.6%. That has been the case for more than 10 years. Thanks to a lot of support from foreign investment. We have been breaking our own investment records for 4 years, $4.6 billion. And this has been combined with two factors. When we talk about export, when we talk about investment, it's the government that announces it, but ultimately it's the private sector that's doing the work. The government don't really do any of the work. We don't actually produce anything. There has to be a strong alliance between government and the productive sector, the private sector, and foreign investors. If that partnership, if that alliance does not exist, it's extremely difficult to achieve economic growth and therefore to achieve a reduction in poverty, because there's no point in growing if poverty stays at the same rate. So in 2023 and 2024, extreme poverty went down, we would hope that the extreme poverty is going to disappear entirely in our country in the coming years. And in our region, we need for there to be a connection between our economies. They're not connected. The other thing that we have in the Caribbean region is physical connectivity. The physical distance is not compensated for by the trade distances. For us as a region, as an island, it takes us longer and it's more expensive for us to reach Europe. And this means that many things that should happen don't happen. We have 11.6 million tourists, for instance, last year. For a very small space, we had incredibly more tourists than Brazil, Colombia, countries that are far, far larger than ours, with millions of square kilometers. We just have 9,000 square kilometers. And why? Because we're a major tourist destination. And this, as we are positioned as we are, the very center of the hemisphere, means that when you come to Latin America, you just go to one country. It's not like Europe where you visit several countries at a time. And when people come to the Dominican Republic, they just visit us. And we need that connectivity to spread this around the rest of the region. But why don't we promote our region collectively? Every type of investment, every type of investor. Our main investors are the United States, followed by Canada, and Spain, Mexico, Brazil. Why isn't this investment shared out more evenly across the region when there are such great opportunities? The lack of financing in the Caribbean, how can we finance our own development? When a product comes from the EU or a company comes, they have that opportunity to draw in and to look to investment, and we don't have those pools. And yet, the region has great opportunities for infrastructure. European countries, but also major companies from the region now have significant experience that can be used elsewhere in the regions. Opportunities on land and sea for transport connections. There are two opportunities. We don't have an aerial sector so much. It's 58,000 passengers who transited, and 1.2 million. Compared to the previous figure that was from a few years ago, that is major inter-regional transport, and that again is a wealth of opportunity that hasn't really been tapped into. And there are new opportunities as well, which are the rare earths that have been mentioned. There are mining opportunities, but we don't really have the capacity to execute a lot of our major projects. And all of this has a major reason on the integration of the region. Finally, I'd like to mention two significant factors. When a European or an Asian product is exported there, it has raw materials from the region. When Latin America or the Dominican Republic exports products, the raw material content from the region is very, very low. We don't have that chain of production, and we don't have those the instruments that we need. We have an agreement, for instance, with the United States, but through Central America. It's probably manufactured in the Caribbean, but it doesn't have the appropriate certifications in order to cross the customs barriers as necessary, and so on. So the greatest heritage I think that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean is peace and our institutions. Without our institutions, without our democratic institutions and peaceful institutions, there can be no investment, no tourism, and there can be no opportunity to talk about major projects. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you for highlighting the importance of communication channels across countries in the region and the need to support productivity. We're going to move to our last panelist for this first panel. We're going to hear from Martín Clavijo from the Uruguayan Cooperation Agency, Executive Director. In 2026, Uruguay will be the temporary president for South-South Cooperation and CELAC. What role can regional integration and South-South cooperation play in technical capacity and financing for building resilience? And what role can the cooperation agencies play for consolidating alliances to maximize the efficiency of cooperation in the region? You have the floor.
¿Se me escucha?
Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm very honored to be on this important panel. I'd like to thank the UNDP, with whom the Uruguayan Cooperation Agency works very closely. You've been a very important partner for us day to day. And we're pleased also to have the authorities from ECLAC, from the Spanish Cooperation Agency, and CEAPI. I'm really very pleased to see our colleagues here. I've been listening very closely to what the other panelists have been saying and thinking about the question I've been asked to answer. This whole topic is linked to the question of how we can attract the private sector and how we can draw in investment from the private sector. And sustainable investments are not just a trend, but this represents a real paradigm shift, as has been said, and a change in how we conceive of development across the region. Uruguay has been working on a number of sustainable finance instruments that I'd like to share with you. And we have a knowledge base on this. There have been sustainable financing instruments. We have a sovereign bond index to climate change. We launched the first bond that was linked to measurable climate goals. Preservation of natural native forests. We've been working on this also with the teams from the UNDP. RAVE investment, renewable energies. And this is supported by the United Nations and local banks. And we're mobilizing private investment to finance the energy transition. 49% of the energy we produce is renewable. There's many different types of projects that we've been financing in this way. Obviously, this is linked also to technical assistance and social and environmental impact.
Que es en este marco de iniciativa global que se implementa.
Also financed through the GEF, and we're promoting also the use of effective financial instruments so that we can conserve key ecosystems. A number of different initiatives from our environmental agency, the Ministry of Economy and Finances, and we're seeking to also build capacity in this area to support a just transition and a low emissions economy that is resilient to climate change. We're working on a roadmap for blue bonds as a tool for climate financing. We have the social impact bond in Uruguay, which we're also reviewing. So all of these different instruments are available. Some have been more successful than others, but they need to be continuously renewed. The social impact bond has the aim of increasing financing for higher education and dual education. We have a problem with youth access to employment in our country. We are generating new measures, new public policy measures to allow us to reduce this problem. And this bond specifically can, or could be, this was a pilot plan, so it has to be reviewed. We have to see if the results are good enough to be scaled up across the country, but it's something that we've trialed. $350 million. There's a credit from the World Bank to work on these ambitious climate goals. We're linking financing to the achievement of goals, identifying opportunities in sustainable investment and focusing them on the SDGs. There are three other things that I wanted to mention.
El fortalecimiento de la política y coordinación
Institutional coordination that is required. And here, the multilateral alliances are extremely important. In 2009, we created our Alliance for Response to Climate Change to build the institutional space for working on climate change across sectors together with the government agencies. And we're designing policies and instruments to address climate challenges. And it was a participative space where we talked about sovereign bonds, and we are following up on this sovereign bond here. In 2021, in the Sustainable Finance Bureau, led by the Central Bank of Uruguay and the Ministry of Finance and the Economy, is a key forum for sustainable finance governance, moving towards a green economy, a taxonomy for the green economy. Sustainable farming, sustainable livestock farming, a whole range of areas where we're trying to align with the sustainability goals. Another key point is South-South and triangular cooperation. This is another of our aims, to strengthen South-South and triangular cooperation. And Uruguay will have the honor of presiding over the South-South cooperation program of the Iberoamerican Alliance. And we're preparing also to hold this dialogue with the private sector, with other funding sources, philanthropic organizations and others.
Y bueno, generar instrumentos creativos que nos permitan atraer fondos, el diálogo.
Regional dialogue as well. Obviously, we have these possibilities of exchange of experience and entering into dialogue with other countries of the region, and also drawing in and attracting investment. In 2022 and 2023, Uruguay and Costa Rica worked together on a triangular cooperation program funded by the EU, where there was an exchange of experience. And under this framework, we worked on the management and development of these areas. Uruguay also has a catalogue of good practices.
Ser un país graduado, entendemos nosotros.
We feel that the way that development is measured is rather unfair. And Uruguay is working with countries like Spain and others on this concept of the transition, so that we can emit ideas and help other countries overcome these hurdles. having graduated from the group, we can share our experience here. We've also signed an agreement with Spain, and I think this agreement reflects the norms and the regulations. We often forget when we talk about that there is political goodwill, and these agreements, they have to be negotiated horizontally under equal conditions, and the financing for development in the countries that have graduated. Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to start wrapping up. So what I'm saying is that we need political will behind everything. It's very nice, it's excellent that we have the private sector here sitting around the table. But fundamentally, they want to know whether they have clear guarantees and norms to allow them to invest. And what we as governments need is political will to move forward. So the cooperation agencies have a very important role to play. And they are really a pivotal juncture, very much at the core of ensuring this legal certainty to allow that investment to take place.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Estoy a las órdenes.
Muchísimas gracias por
If anyone has any questions, I'm available, says the speaker. Now let's move to the second part of this event, which is our second panel. Thank you very much for your patience, because we are quite limited in time, so please stick to the established speaking time limits. Our first panelist in this next section is Jaume Duc, who is from a European councillor and working on foreign actions of the Generalitat de Catalunya. And we're looking at what the priority areas are in the European Union that you are looking at to focus your public and private investments in the region. Thank you very much, Michel and Núria, for inviting me and for the great collaboration we've had between us. Of course, I'd also like to thank the UNDP for this invitation. I speak on behalf of an autonomous regional government that represents 20% of Spain's population and 20% of GDP, that has a lot of skills and a lot to offer in terms of cooperation especially, and we also work with the European Union. At the same time, I think I can say that I represent a long list of regional, local European authorities who are working in line with what we are doing, among other things, helping to get closer to citizens and helping to better understand the real needs of different regions. And very briefly, I'll have 5 messages, including an answer to the question you asked me. First of all, a lot of you have said it. We're at a tough time for democracy. It's a very delicate time for democracy and development policies, and of course, defending these policies and this invisible infrastructure that was mentioned earlier is something that spares none of us, and we're all aware of it. So government, sub-state governments, everyone needs to do everything they can at the different levels of government. And of course, what the government is doing right now is backing multilateralism and institutions, and Latin America and the Caribbean play a very important role. They have a huge amount of potential. They are key. I'm not going to talk about everything, but for example, we haven't mentioned, I won't dwell on this too much, but the benefit of trade agreements like the EU-Mercosur trade agreement that hopefully will come into force soon, the one between Chile and Mexico, and the Andean countries agreement. Secondly, it's true that current challenges are huge. That's why they compel us in the private sector. they compel the private sector, but we're aware that the private sector can't address them alone. There are social, climate, economic crises that require innovation, knowledge, and new alliances. And that's why we, and this was said this morning at the first panel, we need to collaborate with the private sector. That at the end of the day is going to give us more agility, more expertise, and the capacity to set forth pilot projects where institutions indeed can play an important role to make sure that there is long-term impact. We also must extend this cooperation to the other parties around the table, which are multilateral institutions and civil society. This collaboration is fundamental, and at the beginning of the meeting I was looking at the very interesting leaflet, the document you sent around, and the 6 different areas that were mentioned. Well, it's true that pragmatic solutions can be brought, but also when it comes to capacity development and consolidating partnerships with local authorities. And drawing on this scheme, we can hope to consolidate private investments that have a good impact, like we've already talked about. Now, my third message is about what we can do, what we subnational authorities can do. Let's take the example of Catalan cooperation foreign policy, which is decentralized and fully coordinated with state foreign policy, Spain's foreign policy then, and we have alliances for European cooperation too, and there's this common approach that is based on human rights and prioritizing resilience and adaptation to the most significant global challenges in the 2030 agenda. We are collaborating, for example, with the UNDP. We've been doing that since, well, investing actually since 2019, 4 million euros in different projects through the UNDP, and we seek to continue to do this in the near future. My fourth point is precisely to do with the global gateway. In Catalonia, we're very interested in the opportunities that the global gateway can open up as a cooperation and investment framework. And it's something that we really need to strengthen between the EU, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Someone mentioned the 130 projects. We're talking about 45 billion euros pledged by 2027, and we really want to be able to harness these funds. And to do this, public-private cooperation will be fundamental in sectors like renewable energy, green energy, sustainable transport, digital connectivity, or technical education. But here it's also important to mention the localization of the global gateway. In other words, how entities at different levels of government will participate both on the part of countries that are investing as well as on the part of, on the other hand, the countries that are being invested in. We have the different institutions of the EU, the official ones, that are looking at exactly how to use the capacities of regional and local governments on both sides in order to boost the global gateway projects. And we think that's fundamental to mention. Lastly, my fifth message, to follow up on this, we need comprehensive strategies that bear in mind all of these different elements and also the most concrete, directly linked elements for cooperation. And here I'd like to announce that in the framework, of course, of the priorities of the Spanish government and the priorities of the EU itself, we, as the Catalan government, in the first 6 months of next year, hope to approve a strategy of action and collaboration with the Latin American continent, bearing in mind that we have to draw on this strategy to explore new forms of cooperation and to drive forward this public-private partnership that in the Catalan case can include hundreds of companies that are already present and that can still contribute a lot more over the years to come. So we are prepared, we stand ready to be a useful and active, jointly responsible partner in this key agenda for transformation of social justice and sustainability. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, consejero.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for your support to this agenda in the UNDP and for this call for localising the global gateway, which is so important. We also have some panellists from the private sector. We have our next panellist, Mr. Spailat, who's from CONEP of the Dominican Republic, and he has a lot of experience in foreign trade and the public-private link. Private investment is essential for scaling up investment. So what thoughts can you share with us on mechanisms for public-private governance that contribute to generating the conditions required to attract investment in line with the national development priorities? Thank you very much, and a very good morning, everybody. I believe that this invitation to think about resilience, investment, and opportunities is in itself sufficiently thought-provoking. However, this meeting is a time in which we are in a capsule of optimism and looking at how we can move forward with investment and development opportunities during this moment of global turbulence and uncertainty in the global markets, and precisely the fact that at the very heart of the United Nations we're able to have this meeting, I think, is a great sign of things to come and what we can achieve. I'd like to congratulate Michel and the whole UNDP team for making this possible, and also Núria and the CEAPI team for convening this meeting. We also have the President of the National Council of Private Enterprise of the Dominican Republic. Thank you all for being here. If we look at this shared opportunity that is gathering us this morning, well, when it comes to the relationship between the EU and the Latin American and Caribbean continent, the shared values are what really are allowing us to have these in-depth conversations. We've talked about the agreements we have between our regions, and I'd also talk about the CARIFOR EU agreement. And part of these agreements, of course, is liberalising trade, engaging in partnerships, promoting cooperation, and working on economic aspects. In terms of the background of these meetings, well, first of all, we had the Financing for Development conference that was mentioned several times this morning, but I wanted to underscore 4 aspects in order to respond to the question you asked me. How do we see the private sector right now? Well, first of all, there are clear signals of risk reduction and stability in the way we do business. Well, I'm saying this because each country, coming from its own position with its own dynamics, faces its own problems, fiscal deficits, the need to reform and update our labour codes. We see weaknesses and gaps in the training of human capital. Nevertheless, in terms of public-private efforts, what we need to do is have stability and reduce the risks of these weaknesses affecting the way we do business. Secondly, high-quality projects focused on specific initiatives. Here, when it comes to the Dominican Republic specifically, over the last 5 years we've been cooperating closely with the UNDP, and we have been publishing on an annual basis a catalogue of good corporate practices, things that they are doing well and things that are going well for them. In 2024, there were around 150 initiatives, totaling a total amount of $4 billion that had these characteristics. Third, we have financial innovation. Indeed, in these times of high volatility and high interest rates in the global markets, creativity can help us to design instruments that can overcome these challenges and create new opportunities. Lastly, strengthening public-private alliances. Here I'd like to be very pragmatic. Public-private partnerships are a very nice thing to say and talk about in fora like this. However, in order for them to be turned into real development tools and be fully operational, well, they can be identified, programmed, and implemented, bringing private resources and science, and then drawing on science from the public sector. I'd also, like to mention in terms of the Dominican Republic, at the end of the day, a country that has grown as much as that over the last 3 decades, around 5% on average, we are seeing that our growth projections for this year are above 3%, so we are doing well for our region, but we're still 2 percentage points below what we have been on average over the last 3 decades. When we look at the indicators on growth in foreign investment, growth in our exports, and how to invest more in the country, things are going well. However, we need to continue to ensure that economic development goes hand in hand with social development, because in a time of political and economic instability, we were able to make some steps at the end of last year with the Summit of the Americas and the Corporate Summit of the Americas. And when we have these meetings, it will be great to get back together to work to continue to identify opportunities. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cesar, for this perspective from the Dominican Republic. And you were on time as well. You made good time. So our next speaker is Matthias Bendersky from the Inter-American Development Bank, Global Head of Alliances. So how can you and the UNDP empower the cooperation framework signed up between both institutions, empowering your complementarities to articulate innovative solutions in technology, blended finance and development of capacities to promote the mobilization of private capital in high-impact sectors to achieve resilience, electromobility, efficiency, and energy efficiency? Thank you very much, says Mr. Bendersky, and a very good morning. Before I go in depth into finance innovation, and we were listening very closely to what Martin was saying, the sustainable boom of Uruguay begun in 2020 to 2022 to 2024, and you continue to be a benchmark for the world. I'll go into that, but I also wanted to talk about some other things, and I hope to stay within the time limit. The fact is, the global environment is complex and uncertain, and this uncertainty at the same time, I think, offers up some opportunities also. I think it's an historic opportunity. We've talked a lot about cooperation between Europe and Latin America, and I think because we share these democratic values, this is a great opportunity to continue to build reliable and resilient and diversified value chains. When it comes to this agenda, I think, first of all, the bank wants to be this bridge for investment between Europe and Latin America. We have 13 members, European ones, between the Commission and the bank. So we have 48 members in total. And since we launched the Global Gateway Agenda in 2023, well, European partners, just to put this into some figures now, there's a partnership that today is worth hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects. So we want to continue to be a partner of the Global Gateway. We have 108 of the 184 projects in the region are supported by us. Other multilateral banks too are party to them. And this represents over $99 billion in loans and investments. So it really is a lot of resources. I think, well, there are several examples here. I can't go into all of them. However, I'll be as brief as I can. Talking about innovative financial instruments, you were asking, what more can we do? And I think that when we talk about mobilization of innovative instruments, we talk about the private sector. Part of what we all want to do beyond innovation or not is to continue to get private sector finance for us. So in the bank, we are trying to design a bank that is not 100% in terms of numerical value, but that we have two institutions, BIB and BIB Invest, and 44% of our loans and projects are issued by that body. And so here I'm segueing into financial innovation a little bit, and I just wanted to share this with you. This is one of the flagship projects of BIB Invest. And we have shared projects with private investors. We are going to capital markets and trying to get people to buy these security packages, and the security of the bank continues to cover these transactions. The flagship of the bank is Scaling for Impact, and it was precisely with Santander Bank as a main partner. They provided funding for us to open up millions of dollars for projects. There's also the sustainable bonus, which is a blended finance project. And in BIB Invest, we have closed more than 100 investments in blended finance. And this represents around 15 to 20% of the projects of BIB Invest that have a small amount of blended finance. Our office has also worked with Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom and others who often provide us this concessional financing, like some seed funding, and the idea is to get indicators and achieve indicators in areas that are of interest to them, sustainability agenda, etc. However, it's also enabling us to access markets that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do. So I hope that I've said the most important things. Just one last thing I wanted to share with you is we, on the panel, were talking about conducive conditions, the right conditions. So it's very important to create the right conditions for the private sector to be able to invest and feel safe investing in countries in our region. And I'm not only talking about regulating investment or deregulation for investment, but I'm also talking about security for citizens, safety for citizens, so that people feel safe investing in our countries. The truth is, like I was saying before, uncertainty is an important thing, but it can create opportunities. We have this event in Santa Marta with the EU and several of we banks. There's the CEO summit as well. And that will be a great opportunity to hopefully make more investment in the region. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Matías, por compartir.
Thank you very much, Matías, for sharing some examples about innovative finance mechanisms. And something that has struck me that we have been talking about this morning is creating the right conditions for the private sector to invest. Next we have Pablo Casado, president of Hyperion, a specialised capital fund in strategic sectors. Now, Pablo, the accelerated transformation of tech and rapid adoption of AI represents a challenge for democracies and development in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, it can also be an opportunity. So what incentives should the region consider to attract investment from for emerging tech companies, and what role does tech sovereignty play in the current geopolitical context, and what new opportunities are there for cooperation between Spain and Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you very much, says Pablo. I'm going to be as brief as I can. I'm happy to be with you this morning. I like to be an optimist. I think that artificial intelligence is a bit like the fourth industrial revolution. I think that artificial intelligence has a lot of potential, and it's going to be a lot quicker a revolution as well than the previous three. I think Latin America is very well placed for this new industrial revolution. And why? Well, because AI requires data, it requires energy, and it requires raw materials. And these three things are present in Latin America. Europe has a lot of data due to linguistic and ethnic diversity. However, Latin America has a very relevant population and a much more diverse population as well than other regions, so they're very well positioned. In energy, they have great potential too. It needs to be clean, accessible and cheap for data centers because they consume a lot of energy. So there's a lot of excess wind energy that could be used to make hydrogen, also in response to some of the crises we're seeing, like the situation in Ukraine. And there's new limitations on gas and other fuels. And there's also a huge amount of potential for... Okay, so I was mentioning hydroelectric electricity generation, but there's also great potential for wind and solar. There's also rare earth materials. They tend to be processed in economies like China. However, a lot of the raw materials originate in areas like Latin America. So, for AI, we can look at its spread, and while Latin America or Europe aren't that well placed for this, we've seen the main growth in North America with the development. We've seen also some LLM models developed in Asia, but the majority of this technology comes from the United States currently, and there's a lot of protectionism to preserve this. And there are limits on chip exports for this reason. And then there's hardware that comes in its majority from Asia, particularly Taiwan, but also Taiwanese companies are starting to build in Mexico. They're offshoring, but it's overwhelmingly Asian. So key sectors are chips, hardware, modems, which are needed for artificial intelligence. And then there's the raw materials. Okay, so this is an optimistic message. Artificial intelligence, I think, is going to create positive things, wealth, opportunities, and negative things too. So we saw this in the first industrial revolution, and then in the second industrial revolution with the generation of electricity using steam, and then ICTs. And of course they create socio-political situations. They started the creation of the working class and the middle classes. And what's the fourth industrial revolution going to create in terms of society? Well, we don't know. Perhaps longevity, people will live longer. Progress in biochemical and genetic research that might be able to cure more diseases and allow us to live a lot longer. Of course, I don't know how long. There's going to have to be a lot of research in this. But we need to look at policies so that well-being can be maintained. So there are people that say there's going to be a radical transformation of labour, of work, that it's going to be taken over by robots. But you've got to be optimistic. I think when some jobs disappear, new jobs emerge. I think that this fourth industrial revolution is going to affect white-collar workers more than blue-collar ones, because plumbers, workmen, etc. are going to continue to have work. It's not going to affect them. So I think white-collar workers need to be more worried. If you're a lawyer or a consultant, well, if you're specialised, well, that's one thing, but a lot of the billable hours can be augmented by AI. And we're seeing a lot of new things emerge, like with OpenAI, with Grok, etc. And democracy is a key part of this, because there is a challenge for democratic institutions and the rule of law, because the Industrial Revolution brought by AI is creating a lot of confusion with the emergence of fake news and is affecting political representation, because if there's an increase in polls, the fact that there is an increase in polls among young people supporting authoritarianism, well, it's partly because of the impact of these technologies, where you get influence from these platforms. And so I think it's important that the public and private sector go hand in hand. Technological sovereignty is a great challenge in Europe.
I
think in Latin America, we also need to move towards this kind of development. But I'm very optimistic, as you can see. We are moving towards very advanced societies with a lot of prosperity. Of course, there's still poverty in many parts of the world, but the average income is far, far higher than it used to be. And there have always been technological shifts throughout history, and ultimately they give us a better quality of life, stronger democracies, and this is why we are hopeful that a better future lies ahead for all of our societies, as we said back at the time of the constitutions. From Spain's position, Latin America and the Caribbean, we hope that this current revolution will be very beneficial and fruitful for all.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very, very much, Pablo, for injecting a little bit of optimism into our discussions. We still have a few speakers left, a few panelists, so I really apologize, but I'm going to have to ask you to be very brief. We're going to continue with Enrique José Riquelme Vivas, President and CEO of Cox. How can the private sector contribute to renewable energies and ensure that such investment promotes social inclusion, economic transformation, and well-being? Thank you. Good morning to all. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. I'm grateful also to be here amongst the three sectors, the public sector, which is crucial for the development of infrastructure across the region. We also have UN institutions and multilateral organizations, the second pillar that supports this growth, and of course the third pillar, the private sector. So in my experience, I have been working in the infrastructure, water and energy sector in the region for about 15 years across a number of countries of Latin America, with a special focus on Brazil and Chile. And now Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Guatemala and Mexico, where we also have operations slightly smaller than in other markets. As I have very little time, I'm going to try and be pragmatic. I'm not going to try and sweeten the pill. What is it that we need in order to invest? What ingredients are required in order to develop infrastructure to support social and economic development, to have quality jobs, sustainable jobs, training, and make the region more competitive? The first thing that we need is to bring these three pillars together. We have to work together. We need countries to work through the United Nations to achieve this legal certainty, this legal security. This is the foundation that underpins everything in the region. The world is changing. As we heard from Pablo Casado, there's a lot of investment globally, and this means that there is competition. The private sector can choose where it invests. And so the first thing is legal certainty, legal security. The second thing we need clarity. We need a plan for where this investment is going to go. Where is the energy going to go? What is it going to be used for? There has to be a strategic plan, independently of who is in charge or who is governing the country. And so these projects need support for tenders, and they have to be bankable projects. So once you've achieved all of these needs, the legal certainty, the bankability is achieved at the very end. So projects take a very, very long time to develop. People can be working on them for a very long time. But sometimes they don't. The project doesn't get off to the best start. And so with support for banks and multilateral institutions, please, when you're thinking about supporting them, make sure that they are bankable in the long term. They can also be supported by the private sector because there's a whole range of instruments that we've heard about. The second challenge, I think, that we have is the time. If there's a plan, there has to be a time frame, a relatively short time frame. In Latin America, we need infrastructure, and CEO, presidents, a lot of people that we don't have that competitive edge of youth, even to compete with other continents. But today, Latin America has this opportunity because of the resources that it has, and it can have the cheapest energy in the world. Wind energy, solar energy. Latin America has the human capital. It has, on average, a population under 30 years of age. And so we also have this privileged relationship with the United States. It can be a great ally. We need solidarity between the countries with also the United States, transnational solidarity. And this also will allow Latin America to be a leader with this cheapest energy in the world to industrialize Latin America. Latin America has the opportunity to do this. And I'll conclude with this point. We already have clarity. We have a roadmap. We know that it's a bankable project. And again, the time frame is significant. But if we have 5 years without a project, but we all have the pillars, we know what we need to do and how to do it. But it doesn't get done because of bureaucracy. If there is clarity, the private sector is going to be there, and we're going to work very quickly. We've been working, as I say, for 15 years. There's Cox, billions of dollars in the region. We have this region. I'm not speaking as Cox, but more generally as the private sector. We are there. We are ready and we can be pragmatic. We stand ready to develop Latin America in terms of its infrastructure in the next few years on the basis of those three pillars that I've outlined. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Enrique.
Thank you very much, Enrique. We're now going to move to Francisco Cerezo, chairman of US LATAM of DLA Piper, corporate lawyer with extensive experience in advising companies, funds, and governments in the Americas and the Caribbean. As we've already heard from Enrique, investment in the private sector and the sustainable development agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean requires a regulatory framework and legal certainty or legal security. Based on your experience, what makes Latin America an attractive destination, and what are the main challenges, and how can we incentivize such investment that generate well-being? I'm very pleased to be here. So much has been said. I feel like I'd be preaching to the choir. It seems you've pulled the words out of my mouth. So I do agree with a lot of what has been said by Enrique and Pablo already about legal security, the time frames, how long it takes, bureaucracy, and so on. But in terms of attractiveness and all of the positive things that I see in Latin America and the Caribbean, first thing to mention is the demographics. It's a relatively young population, an urban population that is very well positioned to capitalize on this transition, both the energy transition and the digital transition that is occurring. So people, because of their proximity also to the United States, have lots of opportunities on their doorstep in the Caribbean and further afield in Central America, the United States, North America more broadly. So those really are the opportunities, build on what everyone else has said, but this youth has great prospects. What else? What are the challenges? The digital divide, the digital gap is something that still has to be overcome in Latin America. While it's true that we have access to all these extraordinary tools like AI, it's not all that widespread across all of the nations of Latin America. And I think there was another brief question in there somewhere, but I'm just trying to.
Bueno, mira, es interesante.
I'm Associate Director of DLA Piper, and so we work on regulatory frameworks, and between what is said and what is actually achieved, a great distance can be run, as we say. We work on public-private alliances, foreign direct investment, FDI, and so on. But in order, while this framework exists, very often the political will that we need to actually implement it isn't there. And so what I would say that represents the major challenge. Theoretically, at an academic level, everything fits and it looks very nice, and there are these major overarching frameworks. But ultimately, when it comes to implementation, we're not really hitting the mark. And I think that is the main challenge and the main concern. So thanks. I'll leave some time for the next speaker.
Muchísimas gracias, Francisco, por tu.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for being so brief, but also very clear, and for highlighting the optimism as regards the potential of the region. And so to close this panel, we have Claudia Flores from the CAF. So how does CAF see the collaboration, the blue-black bond to get developed together with the UNDP? What are the opportunities here for expansion and diversification? Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Núria, for the invitation. Antonio Silveira, our president for the CAF private sector, is also here. I'll also be very brief, but the bond, the blue Latin American Caribbean bond, we try to go beyond traditional financing, and we try to attract private capital to inclusive and resilient development goals. This is the Blue LAC bond that we have launched, 6 billion euros, aimed at mobilizing resources from capital markets towards protection of marine ecosystems and developing coastal systems to make us more socioeconomic and resilient to climate impacts. And we know that when there is solid design, a robust framework, and a reliable background, the investors respond positively. The bond has not only financed preservation and resilience projects along the coastline, but is becoming a very powerful tool showing that we can have world-class financial tools aligned with the SDGs. The challenge now is to expand these tools, green bonds, blue bonds, resiliency bonds, not just across ecosystems, but across essential infrastructure and also for supply chains. Such mechanisms are really the pathway to closing the major gaps that exist by mobilizing capital. And in order to achieve this, I think we need 3 things. First, visible projects that have been well prepared, well structured, that are bankable. A solid portfolio of projects, as highlighted by Enrique. These vast volumes of private capital cannot be imagined without it. We also need solid ESG and institutions so that investors have confidence in the impact that these projects are generating. And finally, we need risk mitigation strategies to guarantee this bankability from the public side and the private side. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Claudia, por tu reflexión.
Thank you very, very much for these very concrete recommendations on how to draw in more private investment. And with this, we will close our event this morning. The deepest thanks to all of our panelists for being here with us this morning. Thank you also to all of our participants. We wish you an excellent high-level week at the General Assembly.